I also want you all to notice that the people doing this work of protecting our neighbors are regular people. We wake up an hour early to make sure our kids get breakfast and get out the door, so we have time to make sure that the other kids on our block get to school safely. And then we're back out in the streets so that when another parent walks them home after school, it won't be to an empty house. This is a crisis. We can't keep going with business as usual. We're going to be forever changed by this experience, witnessing what is possible when we look to ourselves and one another to build the world we want to live in. We're building that world right here, right now in Minneapolis. Hundreds of thousands of people, including many of you, in this call took action on January 23rd to demand ICE out of Minnesota. But our call isn't for them to go somewhere else and terrorize another community. Our call is that we need to hold to account those in charge. No matter who you are, what skills you have, or where you live, there's a role for you. There's lots of things you can do. But what I'm asking you to do is organize today, tomorrow, and the next day in your own community so that we can have a democracy that keeps our families and our neighbors safe and prosperous. Thank you for letting me talk to you, and I'm going to hand this to my friends at the ACLU for Know Your Rights training.
Hi everyone, my name is Biel and I'm a legal fellow at the ACLU Speech Privacy Technology Project, where I work on defending the First Amendment rights of grassroots activists and organizers. I'm honored to be here tonight with all of you to talk about your right to record immigration and law enforcement. So let's get into it. Next slide, please. So you have a right to photograph or film anything plainly visible in public, including immigration and law enforcement, so long as you're not trespassing or violating a lawful order. Recording immigration and law enforcement officers is not a crime, and they cannot arrest you for that alone. But you want to make sure not to physically interfere with an officer. The First Amendment does not protect interference or obstruction. And we'll talk more about this later, but maintaining a reasonable distance from the officers reduces their ability to falsely claim that you were interfering or obstructing while you were recording. And we also just want to note that on private property, the owner can set rules about photography or video. If an officer demands to see your phone or tries to take it from you, remember that they do need a warrant. Without a warrant, law enforcement may not confiscate or view the contents of your digital devices, nor may they delete your data. Some important limitations to keep in mind. While you do have a right to record law enforcement in public places, there are some important limitations. The First Amendment does not protect civil disobedience. Even if your motivation is law enforcement accountability or sharing immigration enforcement abuses with the public, you can still be subject to punishment for breaking otherwise valid laws. So, for example, many states have hands-free driving laws, and those laws make it illegal to have your phone in your hand while you're driving. In that case, if you're recording ICE from behind the wheel while you're driving and holding your phone, you could still be pulled over or cited for breaking that law. And remember that if you're obstructing or physically interfering with their operations, you can be arrested and punished for that, even if you were doing so to express yourself. And as a side note, since we're talking about recording, some states do have two-party consent laws that would apply in private interactions. So when you're thinking about your right to record, keep that in mind. Next slide, please. Even though you do have a right to record immigration and law enforcement in public, that doesn't mean that it doesn't still carry risks. And so we want to talk about them today. As we've seen time and time again, from LA to Minneapolis, many officers are still retaliating against people who record them. Some of them are reacting harshly to those who record their activities, including by threatening and making arrests or worse. And even though that kind of retaliation is an illegal violation of your constitutional rights, and the fact that it's illegal may protect you from prosecution and punishment once it goes to a judge, that's still a painful and draining process to have to go through. So we want to minimize the risks however we can. And as we've all seen, agents might respond with physical force. They might pull out their guns, they might spray chemical irritants or assault people. And your physical safety and the safety of those around you and the person being targeted or detained is a top priority. So we'll talk some more about some ways to reduce those risks in a bit. We had whistles, they had guns. So we also want to give you a note on whistling. One increasing tactic, which was first popularized in Chicago, has been the use of whistles to warn neighbors that the danger of immigration enforcement is present in the area. When ICE or Border Patrol agents are spotted, the whistles ring out as an early, fast, decentralized warning system. And the sound of whistles brings neighbors who are willing to assume the responsibility of bearing witness out of their homes to observe and document. It also enables those who don't want to be exposed to this activity to stay away. That could include parents who prefer to shield their young children from trauma. It also includes people fearful of being targeted, harassed, or subject to unlawful stops, questioning, and excessive force, regardless of their immigration status. When whistles blow, reports are made to local immigrant rights groups, observers are alerted, and abusive enforcement tactics are less likely to go unseen, unheard, and unaccounted for. So whistles are a clear and recognizable way to signal to others nearby that help is needed and that abuses of power might be occurring, or to summon others to lawfully document and record immigration enforcement. But there are some considerations to take into account if you plan to use whistles or other forms of communication to alert others about nearby enforcement operations. Whistling in this context actually hasn't been tested in court yet, so we can't predict for certain how courts will view whistling. But what we can offer you today is an analysis drawing from general First Amendment principles regarding free speech and the right to protest. So here are some basics for you to keep in mind. You have a First Amendment right to share or report information about what law enforcement officers are doing in public and where they're doing it. You also have a First Amendment right to peacefully protest, which includes the right to express your opposition to law enforcement activity, whether that's through silence or through communication intended to be heard by people nearby. But remember, you do not have the right to interfere with or obstruct law enforcement officers from performing their duties, and you can be criminally charged for doing so. Next slide, please. Oh, no, sorry, that's the right slide. So whistles, when specifically used to interfere with enforcement operations, are not likely to be viewed by courts as a protected First Amendment right. The First Amendment does not protect an attempt to help someone evade detection if you know, or if you're acting in reckless disregard of the fact that the person in the country is in violation of immigration law. But again, because these questions are largely legally untested when it comes to whistling, the best we have to share with you is an analysis drawn from general First Amendment principles. Whistling done with the intent to alert the community to general dangers of aggressive law enforcement as it impacts all people is more likely to be viewed by courts as protected by the First Amendment. So that includes whistling to summon willing observers to come out and bear witness in the hope of deterring abuse and holding officers to account. That includes whistling to warn vulnerable and risk-averse neighbors of the threat of excessive force, harassment, and wrongful arrests, especially if they're perceived to look or sound undocumented. Whistling to alert parents who wish to shield children from the trauma. These are all situations in which we think that the First Amendment is more likely to protect this in the eyes of the court. To be clear, when we say more likely, we are saying more likely because no cases have yet tested whistling specifically in this context, so we can't predict for certain how courts will view the activity at this time. And I know this leaves a number of open questions, especially since whistling is often done with many other people who may hold different purposes in their minds, and these are legally untested waters. In addition, ordinary rules prohibiting obstruction, physical interference, and creation of safety hazards always apply, as well as local noise ordinances. So blowing a whistle will not shield you from being charged with other crimes. In considering whistling, given these uncertainties, you can also always consult additional and especially more local expert resources. And finally, whistling may antagonize law enforcement agents, and therefore you will also need to assess your own personal safety risks for yourself, separate from even risk of arrest or prosecution. Your personal level of risks there may also depend on the history of other activities or actions regarding immigrants and law enforcement, or the histories of the people with whom you're coordinating. Now I'm going to pass it to Maribel to tell us more about ways to reduce risks while recording immigration and law enforcement.
Thank you, Bill, and hello, everyone. My name is Maribel Hernandez Rivera. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the National Director for Immigrant Community Strategies at the ACLU. Thank you for being here tonight. First, I want to say thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for being here. As somebody who is formerly undocumented, I'm just touched by the fact that so many people are putting their lives at risk, their safety at risk to protect our communities. I can tell you I was a teenager when I was undocumented and did not think there were people out there like you. Thank you for being here. Now, Buell has just shared with us what our rights are, what the Constitution says. And it's important to note that the Constitution protects every single one of us, documented or not, citizen or not. And then again, we are seeing that this administration seems to care less about the Constitution. But we're not going to let them get away with it. Because if we give up our rights, that's the easiest way for them to trample on them. If we continue to exercise them, we're going to make it that much more difficult. Aida mentioned earlier today that we're seeing change. The fact that Greg Bovino won't be there anymore, that's huge. So I know sometimes it feels difficult, and sometimes you wonder, why do this? Does this matter? Sometimes I know I have heard people ask, why know my rights if they're being violated? And I can tell you a few things. One, why do this? Because it does matter. Because there's some people who are very vulnerable right now who need you to speak out. One. Two, knowing our rights is important because even if they get violated, being able to document, which is what we're talking about today, it's important so we're able to challenge violations in court. And three, when we're talking about documentation, that is how we that's how we show the abuses of power. That's how we change the conversation. We're seeing more and more people right now saying, enough is enough. Not on my watch. Why? Because people like you are documenting and recording. So we talked to you about your risks, the rights. Let's talk about the risks because those are very real, right? We are seeing it. And we are seeing that even if we know our rights, there might be violations. So let's be ready for this. Our top concern for you all is your safety and de-escalation. And again, we can tell you ways to prevent or minimize risk, but we can't eliminate it, unfortunately, at this moment. But nevertheless, let's keep this in mind. One of the ways to mitigate risk is by maintaining our distance. And some people may ask, well, what is safe distance? Well, I can tell you, one of the rules of thumb is if the officer has to walk towards you because you're at that distance, that's a good rule of thumb of safe distance. So keep in mind maintaining your distance. Another one, avoid sudden movements and remain calm. One of the things that officers often rely upon, they're like, well, I had reasonable cause to believe that Maribel was going to do X because she all of a sudden did Y. So if we remain calm, if we avoid sudden movements, we give them less of a reason to say that they believed that something bad was about to happen. As Buell mentioned, there are laws in certain places where you can't be using your hands and holding other things while driving. So one of the things that you can keep in mind is, well, are there alternatives? There definitely are. The passenger can record. There are also some people who are now using dash cams. So again, being aware of what excuse can they use to come after you is something to think about. Keeping our hands open and visible is really important. Following instructions. I know sometimes it's really hard because we hear the instructions, we believe those instructions are not lawful, we believe that what they're doing is wrong, and it can be, and that could be the case. But let's again, talk about right now mitigating risks, de-escalating, and keeping safe. So let's make sure that if we want to do that, the best thing to do is follow the instructions, and we can always challenge them in the court of law. We can always record what happened. We can always document for later. But in the moment, it's just best to follow those instructions. And as you're following them, and if you're recording, record yourself complying, right? So if the officer says back away, you can say, okay, officer, and then you can record yourself backing away. So you can continue to record if you feel comfortable, and at the same time, make sure that it is recorded that you actually did comply with the instructions. And then Buell mentioned not resisting, not obstructing. Now, again, I want to emphasize that many of these things people do, and then again, things get out of control. So this is not, I'm not saying that this will definitely take away any risk, but these are some tips that we can use. Now, I want to move us towards a role play because I know that it's always helpful to practice because when we are like actually in the action, it's hard to remember what we learned. So it's always better to practice right now. So I'm going to ask Buell to come on camera so that we can both do a role play. And let me set the scene for this role play. First, I want to thank the Midnight Special Law Collective because they created these role plays. And these role plays are about an observer who is documenting an arrest and is trying to record what's happening. But what they're doing, and they're doing it behind a law enforcement officer. Buell is going to be the observer. I'm going to be the law enforcement officer. And in the first scenario, Buell's going to take an approach where she is right on my face. And then in the second scenario, she'll take a different approach. Feel free to write in the chat what you're seeing, the different approaches that you're seeing, and why you think that might be the case. So, Buell, you ready? Great. I see you there. So let's do it. Action. Hey, back away.
I have a First Amendment right to film ICE.
I said back away.
I have a right to document you. Hey, that's my phone. I was recording with that.
Well, now take notes. Scene. So that was one approach to our observer recording what was happening. Let's take a different approach and see what that looks like. In this approach, you will see how Buell behaves. Buell, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Hey, back away.
I'm backing away, officer.
I told you to back away.
I'm backing away, officer.
Scene. Thank you, Buell. Buell, can you share with us? I know our audience is participating in the chat and telling us what the differences are, but from your perspective, what were those differences?
So in both scenarios, I was exercising my right to record immigration officers operating in public. And from a legal standpoint, the Constitution should protect me from arrest or prosecution for recording in both scenarios. But you can also notice some key differences in how I handled the officer's aggression and threats. So in the first scenario, I used my rights to argue with the officer. And even though the First Amendment does also protect that speech, arguing with an officer could also escalate the situation, and it could put me and others in physical danger. And in the second scenario, I simply exercised my rights while also de-escalating, and I achieved the same result, which is getting a recording of the officer's activities. And in the meantime, I also reduced my risk and the risk to others around me and the person who's being detained.
Thank you, Buell. And again, those are two approaches for you to think through how would you react. And again, sometimes in the middle of the action, it's hard to think about it. So if you think about it now, that's the best way to do so. All right, can we go to the next slide, please? Now let's talk about best practices when recording. So one of the things is make sure you capture the details, such as the documents that the agents produce, if they produce any. For example, if they're going door to door, they might produce a document, they might not. Any weapons that they're carrying, any badges, any uniforms, anything that they are wearing, it's important. Also capture the context. For example, if you're in the street, what are the street signs? What are the landmarks? That's important. Are there any other cameras present? Because as we have seen, it is because of the cameras and the recording that people have done that we know what happened. And seeing it from different angles is really important. So are there any other cameras present? If you are recording, do not stop recording between shots because that was easier to know exactly what was happening. Now, after you film, make sure that you make a copy of the footage so that you don't lose it to another device. Make sure you do not edit the original and that you do not edit the file name or anything. You want to make sure that it's preserved as is, because if we are to use it as evidence, we need to make sure that it has not been tampered with. Now, one of the questions that I get asked for is like, okay, what do I do with the footage? One of the things, the best thing to do is to either give it to the victim's family or their lawyer if you have their information, because they get to decide whether they want to release it, how they want to release it, what is the best way to release it. That is the best way to do. If you don't have access to the family and you don't have access to their lawyer, you could also contact immigration organizations in your area who probably can guide you as to like what is the best way to do it in your locality. So that's something to think about. Now, Buell, we have about 5 minutes for questions. And I've been looking at the chat and I'm seeing some questions that are coming through. So the first question actually is for you. So let me ask you the first question. And the question is, we're talking about phones, right? And there's a lot of questions like, should I use my phone? We're seeing what's happening. And the question is, what should I do if an officer takes my phone away from me and keeps it or looks at it without a warrant?
So if an officer takes your phone away or looks at it without a warrant, then you should immediately make a detailed record of the incident. You should write down the exactly what happened. You should write down the officer's badge number if you have it, the number of their patrol car, and you should also collect the contact information of anybody else who was around you and witnessed it. And especially if they also have video documentation of the incident, you'll also want to collect that. And then we recommend reporting it to a legal team that you're working with if you have one, or otherwise you can reach out to your local ACLU to share what happened. And that way we can vindicate your rights from there.
Thank you, Bill. And speaking of warrants, we're getting a lot of questions because in recent days, there was this reporting about how ICE and this administration has now told ICE, you know what? You don't need a judicial warrant to enter somebody's home. You can actually use an administrative warrant. So we're getting a lot of those questions. And the question is, has that changed? Bill, do you want to take it first? And I can add.
I'm going to let you go ahead with that one.
You got it. Well, so I think this is really important. The Constitution has not changed. The law has not changed. Because this administration says so, it doesn't mean that it's so. So, in the case of a judicial warrant, let's just be clear. The Fourth Amendment requires that any government official has a judicial warrant, and that is another question that we got. What is a judicial warrant? It's a warrant signed by a judge. It is issued by a court. It has to be valid. It has to have the date that is valid, and it has to clearly state what they're searching for or who they're looking for. Those are the requirements under the Constitution, which again protects every single one of those. That has not changed. So yes, in recent days we have heard reports that this administration is now telling its officers, it's okay, you don't need a judicial warrant. You can just enter into somebody's home. I can tell you that the law has not changed. And so here's where we know our rights and our risks. The right is you have the right to not consent to people to come into your home unless they have a judicial warrant. They do not have the right to enter your home unless they have a judicial warrant. And now the risks, because under this administration, we are seeing officers come in and we're seeing this directive, which by the way, was secretive, which by the way, we learned about it because there was reporting. Otherwise, we would not have known. So just to emphasize and underline, the law hasn't changed, the Constitution hasn't changed, and yet we are seeing violations. Buell, we have a question for you here, and it says, what happens if law enforcement demands your phone and threatens you with arrest if you don't hand it over?
I think we already answered that one, but I'm seeing another question come up a lot, which is what if the order is to stop recording? And if officers are telling you to stop recording, again, every circuit court who has looked at this question has agreed that you do have a First Amendment right to record law enforcement operations in public. So we believe that the First Amendment does protect this activity and that they cannot lawfully tell you to stop recording or retaliate against you for doing so. They need to suspect you and have probable cause for you actually committing a crime, and it's not a crime to record law enforcement. So at that point, it's really up to you and your risk assessment if you want to continue to record, knowing that it should be protected, while also weighing that against the awareness that many people's rights are being violated right now, and there's always some risk of, retaliation, whether that's physically or with arrest. So something for you to weigh for yourself.
Thank you, Buell. Also, we're seeing a lot of the question as to whether the slides will be available. And I should tell you this presentation is being recorded, and you will be receiving the recording with the slides. I also should know that if you go to the aclu.org in our Know Your Rights section, we have all of this information where you can get it. And there was a question, in fact, as I want more information so that I can provide that information to my community, so we can do that. I'm seeing a question that, again, somebody saying, I'm a naturalized citizen. Should I consider carrying my passport with me? Should I make a copy? I am worried that if I carry it and I get stopped, they might take it away. And if I don't know, and I don't know what would happen, should I carry a copy? So, again, let's go back to the law. The law in the United States does not require anybody to carry proof of citizenship. That's the law. And however, some people who look like me, who speak like me, we are now choosing to carry something just in case violations happen, right? So some people are choosing to carry their passport. There's also a passport card that some people are choosing to carry. Other people, what they're choosing to do is they're making sure that their family and their loved ones know where to obtain that documentation in case it's needed. Because the reality is that we have seen US citizens be picked up and detained by this administration, even when they're saying I'm a US citizen, even when they're saying I'm a US veteran, even when they're showing documents, right? And the way for them to get out is to show that they're US citizens. So you could either carry something with you, and I understand the risks are real. I hear you in terms of that it could be lost, it could be damaged, it could be taken. I hear you. And so what we need to do is a risk assessment. What makes you feel more comfortable? You could carry a copy and then keep the original at home and make sure that your emergency contact knows where to find it. Either your passport, your birth certificate, your naturalization certificate. Those are some choices. Buell, do you see another question coming your way?
Yes, I see a question about what is the legally safe distance, or what's the legal distance that I have to be away to record. And there's no bright line legally for what that distance needs to be. So unless you live in a state that might have a specific law that officers could invoke telling you to back up a certain distance. But for those of you who live in states without those laws, you will just assess for yourself what is reasonable, and also you might want to take cues from the officer. And remember that a good rule of thumb would be that you want to be enough steps away from the officer that they would have to affirmatively walk towards you to be in physical contact with you. So you want the officer to have to actually come towards you in order to contact you. And that's going to reduce the chance that they claim that you are interfering. And you also want to make sure that you're not blocking anyone from entering or exiting the area. So these are some good guidelines, and overall, something you also want to check out with your local experts as well.
Thank you, Buell. Well, that is all the time we have for questions because we have more programming for you. We have amazing speakers who are in the front lines doing the work of protecting our communities. The next speaker is Pablo Alvarado. He's the co-executive director of the National Day Laborer Organizing Network, and they have been doing amazing work to protect our communities. Pablo, thank you for being with us. Thank you for the work that you do, and I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you to Indivisible for convening this urgent call. And thank you all for showing up tonight with your minds and hearts open. My name is Pablo Alvarado, and I serve as co-director of Endilon, the National Day Labor Network. And like all of you, I come here with a broken heart. I am Salvadoran, I'm a Salvadoran American, an immigrant. And I'm here with deep pain and outrage. Across this country, migrant communities are not only living in fear of assault and imprisonment, they're also enduring and witnessing deadly violence. In Minneapolis this month, as we all know, Renee Nicole Good and Alex Pretti were shot dead in encounters with ICE and Border Patrol. The deaths of these witnesses, who are our allies, our friends, our compañeros, as well as the many hidden deaths of migrants in detention, shocked the conscience of our country. And these are not isolated events. They are part of an escalating campaign of authoritarian brutality. As I said, I'm Salvadoran, and I've seen what authoritarianism looks like. I lived it and I experienced it as a child and as a young man. And what is happening in Minneapolis now is similar to what I live in my own homeland, but also to what we experienced in Los Angeles last summer. Immigrant neighbors terrorized, families traumatized, and fear spreading everywhere where people gather to work, to live, and build community. The victims of this violence are not abstract numbers. They are our relatives, our neighbors, our colleagues, our friends. With each life lost, the anguish hits family homes, places of worship, workplaces, school playgrounds, and we cannot look away. This moment demands that we move from indignation to action. It demands that we show up for one another in person, in peace, full of courage, determination, and love. If you are able to step forward, if you are not at risk of deportation, we're asking you to consider taking action today, not later, today. It's obvious that the masked agents have the power of their badges, their institutions, and their weapons. But we have the power of the people, a power rooted in care, accountability, and community. And this is why my organization, Endilon, launched last summer a campaign that's called Adopt the Corner. It's a call to conscience. And here is what it means. Very simple. Find the places in your community where immigrants workers gather. It could be Home Depots, car washes, delis, day labor centers, street corners, construction sites. I'm sure you've seen some of these in your communities. Go there and commit to showing up regularly. Be present, be consistent, build relationships, get to know the workers, get to know their names, offer support, stand beside immigrants in the face of unjust enforcement, peacefully, powerfully, with love and care. This is solidarity in action. I've seen it. A daily commitment to accompany our neighbors that are in harm's way. Our invitation is about presence, to bear witness, to document the cruelty, to build trust with immigrants, and let all vulnerable neighbors know that they are not alone, that we are not alone. Adopt the Corner is rooted in our belief that solo el pueblo salva al pueblo, that only the people can save the people. Throughout history, when government power inflicts violence and intimidation on marginalized groups, it has been the consistent, visible presence of community that has made a difference. Chicago and Minnesota have also taught us that. Studies and lived experience tell us that when people are seen, when there are eyes, relationships, care, accountability, enforcement actions, unjust enforcement actions lose some of their power to divide and terrorize. Your presence matters. Your consistency matters. Your care matters. So here today, I want to make a clear request. Please, if you're able, adopt the corner in your community. Visit our website, endilon.org, adopt the day labor corner to find more information and get involved. Today, we honor the memories of Renee Good and Alex Pretti by doing that because they stood with us for solidarity. They stood for courage, for solidarity and justice. So thank you all for your time, for your commitment. We need all of you. We need you to show up, to stand beside immigrant neighbors, and to live the values that we claim. Solo el pueblo salva al pueblo. Only the people can save the people. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Pablo.
I'm
And
gonna
now we're
pass
gonna
it to my sister Satari Gandehari from our sister organization, the Detention Watch Network.
Thank you, Pablo. Thank you for your powerful words and the powerful work that you all lead. My name is Setara Gandahari, and I'm the Advocacy Director at Detention Watch Network, a national coalition building power through collective advocacy, grassroots organizing, and strategic communications to end immigration detention in the United States. For nearly 30 years, we have been dedicated to exposing the horrors of immigration detention in the US, a system that is fundamentally inhumane, unnecessary, and deadly. I wanted to take a moment tonight to discuss how the violent attacks that we are seeing in our communities against our immigrant loved ones is connected to the immigration detention system, which is where people, including many families and children, end up after they are targeted and removed from their communities, and how this detention system is a central part of the administration's deportation agenda. Right now, the United States is experiencing unprecedented expansion of the immigration detention system, which was already the largest detention system in the world. This system has expanded by nearly 75%, with over 70,000 people currently in ICE detention. And this administration is aggressively trying to expand that system even further. From tent camps on military bases, to big private prisons, to contracts with local jails and state prisons across the country. The Trump administration is on a spending spree, and the number of people detained will skyrocket over the next 3 years if Congress doesn't cut their funding now. This is why we have also called on members of Congress, in addition to cutting the funding of these agencies, to routinely visit facilities and exercise their oversight of the system. To be clear, as many of you may know, these detention centers are ripe with terrible, abusive conditions, including inadequate medical care, inedible food, and racist abuse. Last year, a record 31 people died in ICE detention. And this year, within the first 2 weeks of the year, we'd already seen 6 deaths, one of which is being considered a homicide at the hands of detention guards. Detention Watch Network has members across the US advocating to end immigration detention and supporting people who are cruelly held in these facilities across the country. Our Communities Not Cages campaign supports and amplifies local community organizing to end ICE detention while illuminating the dangers of the Trump administration's multi-layered detention expansion plan. If you want to join us in that fight and unite for the rights of immigrants, the Communities Not Cages campaign is a great place to start. ICE detention centers are everywhere and expanding, which means federal policy is a local issue in communities nationwide. At Detention Watch Network, we can connect you with community organizing that may already be happening in your area. We can offer toolkits and training and other resources to help you get started to keep ICE out of your communities. I will now turn it over to Ashley. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we're so grateful for your leadership and the leadership of the Detention Watch Network. Y'all, I don't know about you, but I am rageful. I am inspired. I'm feeling all the feels, and I know that you are used to coming to our calls and not only getting information, training, political education, lessons from leaders that you can trust on the front lines, but you're also used to getting a call to action. Y'all are ready to be told what we're going to do together next, right? I think you are. But before we get to it, again, I just have to show some love to the ACLU. to Indaline, the National Day Labor Organizing Network, to Detention Watch Network, to Indivisible. I know we've got some Indivisible fam on the call tonight, and to the whole of the No Kings Coalition. Also want to shout out Act TV for making tonight's call possible. Y'all, this country and all of our neighbors in it and all of our neighbors around the world are absolutely disgusted and horrified by abuses committed using hundreds of millions of our taxpayer dollars. According to a recent survey from Data for Progress, 55% of voters think that any increased funding for immigration enforcement agencies is a bad use of taxpayer money. Again, 55% of voters. The New York Times polling released on Friday, meanwhile, found that 61% of people believe ICE's tactics have gone too far. Voters who watched yet another one of our neighbors be shot down in the middle of a Minneapolis street in broad daylight are looking to Congress to rein in ICE and hold them accountable for their actions. And senators currently hold the fate of ICE and Border Patrol funding in their very hands. This week, the Senate is meeting to vote on 6 government funding bills ahead of a January 30th government shutdown deadline. If Congress now renews the ICE budget with no strings attached, it will become complicit in the violence, the violations of rights, and chaos ICE is fomenting every single minute of every single day. This is the moment, my friends, to call your senator and tell them to do the right thing. And you might be like, Ash, you always telling me to call my senator. But yeah, I'm telling you to call your senator. I want you to follow the link that we're posting. You can see it right below my face, I believe. And I want you to call. You'll get connected directly to your senator's office if you click that link. And when you're connected, this is what I want you to do. I want you to tell them your name, let them know that you are their constituent, give them your city or your zip code, and tell them that you want them to refuse to fund the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, without real limits and accountability for ICE and CBP, ICE and Customs and Border Patrol. If no one answers, it's okay. Still call, leave a voicemail. And I also want you to sign our petition calling on Congress to end these reckless immigration raids that are literally destroying families and communities, and oppose any bill that would further expand ICE's already massive budget. Y'all, I see you in the chat dropping other calls to action. I see you. There's so much that can be done. These are 2 concrete things that you can do tonight. And if you've already done it, you can do it again. And if you've already done it twice, then you can ask a few of your friends to come and do it with you. Right? If you are focused on other actions, you can keep sharing them. I see the ICE Out for Good and other things in the chat. I see you. Thank you again for taking the time to join this call, not regarding it robbery, to come together across difference, to be here learning together and making a commitment to take action together tonight, to learn about your rights and be willing to do your part to protect communities from the horrible, horrible harms that ICE is creating for our people. Your voice and actions matter. When we turn intimidation into momentum, y'all, we change what is possible. We make the impossible possible. While it can feel daunting, scary, overwhelming to speak out in the face of threats, other nonviolent movements have shown us that when we show up and we come together across our differences and we're bigger than the sum of our parts, we can keep each other safe and we can protect each other while we exercise our rights. We hope the information we provided on documenting and recording law enforcement encounters is helpful as you continue to support your communities. I personally, and I think every single speaker on this call, share your outrage in this moment, share your grief, share your concern. And I want to commend you for your bravery and continuing to take action despite all the odds. As was just shared, Congress must also do their part to stop ICE from harming our communities and to keep us safe. Your outreach to them is essential. It is critical. It is necessary for them to do the right thing. So please take a moment, to call your senators, call your members, and tell them not one single penny more for ICE brutality. We also hold another one of these calls. We're going to do it. And I ask that you don't just be the only one of your peeps that show up to the call. I'm asking that you recruit 2 neighbors to join the next Eyes on ICE training. Again, I want you to call your senator. I want you to get folks to do it with you. I want you to sign the petition. And I want you to get 2 of your neighbors to join the next Eyes on ICE training. Y'all, we're going to continue to stay in touch. We're going to continue to stay connected, and we're going to continue to share information on what is happening across the country to our people in ways that you can take meaningful action to make a change and build the kind of world that we've always deserved, where we have healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities for all of our people. Again, I want to thank you one more time and all the organizations that made this call tonight possible, and for you for not regarding it robbery to once again show up and show out with us. To the thousands, tens of thousands of you that are on the call, we are grateful. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.